Our climate is changing in ways that will have a catastrophic effect on life here on planet Earth. There are ways we can reverse the adverse effect of climate change, but few in positions of power are willing to listen. Hi, I'm Ted Asregadoo. This is Truthout Interviews, and on the program is Bruce Melton. He's a professional engineer, an environmental researcher, and a filmmaker. He's also the author of a book, Climate Discovery Chronicles, and a contributor to Truthout. Hey, Bruce, welcome to Truthout Interviews.
Morning, Ted.
Let's talk about how climate scientists create models first. They measure climate change in a certain way. As you note in your article on Truthout, you say that weather forecasters here, just people you watch on TV, people you listen to on the radio, they often get their 7-day forecast wrong. But it's through the models that meteorologists use, which are very small models, and they tend to measure current data, as you noted, that produce this incorrect data often. Now, the climate scientists use that model plus a lot of different models. It's not just one. It's as you noted. I think it's in the hundreds of models to find incorrect data, and through that incorrect data, they actually find a pattern that gives them correct forecasting with regards to climate change. To me, that seems counterintuitive. How can wrong data give you correct data? And maybe you could tell us how this works.
It's a little confusing. Maybe it's a lot confusing. The weather models just look at one point in time, like the day 7 on the 7-day forecast. Half the time it's wrong. What the climate modelers do is they take basically all of these weather models, and instead of running them 7 days, they run them decades, generations out into the future, and they run a whole bunch of them. And then they take all of these wrong forecasts. So you got a forecast for 25 years in the future for today, and you run 100 different versions of the model. You start them at different places in time, and you end up with 100 different forecasts for this day. The climate models average all of those forecasts, even though maybe one of them will be right. You average all of them together to get climate. So weather is just one day. Climate is averaging 100 days together.
So there's a distinction. I didn't realize, you make the distinction between what weather is, and that's why they call it weather forecasting, and what climate scientists do, which is climate forecasting, which is completely, well, not completely different. It factors in weather, but it has other factors in it as well.
Another good way to think about it is the meteorologists run their climate model, the meteorologists run their weather models based on the latest weather data. They load all the data up into it from all over the world or all over a region up until 5 minutes ago. And then they run the models off into the future, and it's right for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 days, but then it gets wrong. The climate modelers, they can use any old weather data from last year, year before, just as long as it's relatively new. And so they start this simulated Earth from any point in time. And then they run all these different models, all these hundreds of different models, and average them all together. So you don't even have to have the most accurate, up-to-date weather data to run a climate model.
And so what you're saying is that it's these averages, because they vary. Sometimes I'm sure you have some wild swings within the data, but then you might see a pattern start to emerge. It may be off by a few. I don't know exactly what the numeric terminology they use to measure this is, but whatever that is, whether it's by degrees or just plain numbers, that these numbers will vary within a small amount, and it's within those variations that you start to see correct climate change patterns happen. Is that correct?
That's right. The weather models, each individual one, you'll have the peaks, the extremes, getting warmer, say, and the cold extremes getting warmer as well. So everything starts trending. Same thing happens with precipitation. You'll get generally drier climate on the interior of continents with climate change. So everything does start moving, and that's how the averages work. The peaks get higher, they all get averaged together.
Well, let's get into something that that the media is often complicit in, and we're talking about how this data and the term incorrect can easily be amplified and shown that, oh, you're using bad data or wrong data. And this is the way in which the media is complicit. And I work in the media, and I often see many reports about climate change that will come out and say, but other scientists contest these facts. Now, the other scientists, as you noted in your article, are often about 3% of researchers within the scientific community that study this. And within those 3%, their research has often been proven wrong over and over again. Yet, the 3% that's the very vocal and very small minority gets a good chunk of media time. Sometimes 90% of the conversation is devoted to what they're talking about. And you talk about this in terms of that the media often looks at this in terms of fairness, that they're trying to be fair to each side.
The media has grown up, so to speak, over the last 50, 75 years, really, attempting to be fair through journalistic ethics and through legislation and laws like the Fairness Act and the Equal Time Doctrine. You know, both pointed towards political or issue-based reporting so that journalists were required to present both sides of an issue. Now, you come into trouble when you look at fact-based things. And like 97% of climate scientists agree that the Earth is warming and that mankind is responsible. 3% disagree. The media reports the two sides of the story fairly. So they're reporting the 3%, say if they did it absolutely equally, they're reporting the 3% of climate scientists 50% of the time, or giving them 50% of the credit, or talking about their ideas 50% of the time, when in reality, they're only a very small portion, or their views are only a very, very small portion of the total climate science community. And it's the fairness bias, and it interjects a bias into what the public understands, because they see both sides presented equally, whereas if this was a science-based, a fact-based reporting, the 3% would be reported 3% of the time.
Right, exactly. But then you also have the fact that if these media outlets are trying to be fair and they're giving equal weight to this 3% whose research is dubious at best, what you have is an opportunity by those interests who want to keep the status quo, meaning that we'll keep burning fossil fuels, we'll keep burning coal. We have businesses that have a lot of money invested in this. This is how they make their money, and they profit off of this. So they exploit the fact that there's this perceived fairness bias, if you will. Even though the fairness doctrine was abolished during the Reagan administration, we still have these news outlets that like to tout themselves as a fair forum for the airing of issues. But what ends up happening is an interest, a group, whether it's oil, whether it's gas, they see an opportunity that says, well, now I can hammer my message home because now I'm given equal amount of time. And even if that message is incorrect or it's full of falsehoods, it doesn't matter. It's well, it's just it's a point of view. It's not it's part of the propaganda that reinforces people's views that climate change is still disputed, that we just don't know.
It's a tremendous opportunity for, basically the fossil fuels industry. They perceive that they are threatened with extinction, and rightly so. And they are the richest and most powerful entities ever known. So they're going to protect their interests, and they're doing a very good job of it, and they're using the media very effectively. That's the biggest challenge we've got with climate science outreach, is overcoming the false information that's being reported unequally, because of the fairness bias.
One of the parts of your article that you highlight that I was not aware of, and thankfully when I read your article now I am aware of it, and that is the two types of pollutants that you highlight: cooling pollutants and warming pollutants. Can you take us through the difference between the two, what they are, and how they affect the climate?
Global warming pollutants, most of us are familiar with them now. Carbon dioxide is the biggest. Methane is a big threat. Water vapor is another large global warming gas. Global cooling pollutants are the biggest set of those is the sulfur dioxide chemicals that come from burning fossil fuels. You get sulfur impurities, and these sulfur impurities reflect light back into space before it has caused warming and has been able to be trapped by the greenhouse effect. So the more cooling pollutants that are emitted by burning fossil fuels, the less warming is actually happens. It's just a net math thing. When you look at the difference between coal and oil, for instance, there's a piece of work out that evaluates the total warming and cooling from different economic sectors. When you look at the energy generation sector, which is dominated by coal, or at least it was when this article was written several years ago, gas and fracking have really gained a share. Coal, because coal is so dirty, it emits a whole lot more cooling pollutants than oil. Oil burns a lot more cleanly. It's mostly those cooling pollutants that differentiates the two, oil and coal. So in the short-term time frame, when you sum up all of the global warming and cooling from any individual economic sector, the transportation sector, which predominantly burns oil, is responsible for 2.5 times more warming than coal. And this is in the short-term climate time frame because these global cooling pollutants don't last very long in the atmosphere. They rain out, they fall out because of gravity, they change to other things, and they're not cooling pollutants anymore. Whereas the carbon dioxide lasts for hundreds of years in the atmosphere. It's still the biggest player in the long run. But the policy that I would like to see is that we basically reduce emissions from transportation, from oil, at a rate that's 2.5 times larger than what we reduce the emissions from coal. That way, we can stay even. If we don't do that, it's as if we were doing nothing at all, and there will actually be more warming than if we were reducing.
At the end of your article, you end on a hopeful note. And I think this is how we're going to end. And this is the idea behind it is called sky mining. And maybe you could tell us what it is and how it can help reduce our the amount of pollutants in the air that contribute to climate change in a way that it may even just solve the problem, hopefully.
Sky mining is basically air capture of carbon dioxide. And, we capture carbon dioxide, or we're attempting to capture carbon dioxide out of the flues, the exhaust from the coal generating facilities. What air capture does is captures it directly from the ambient air, from the air we breathe that's not directly associated with generating electricity. Suck it out of the air anywhere, take the carbon dioxide out of it, and dispose of the carbon dioxide somehow. And that's what I basically refer to as sky mining. Instead of taking the carbon out of the ground, we're taking it out of the air, put it back in the ground. Starting out, it's going to cost about $200 a ton, but over time, as the sky mining industrial machine grows, it's going to take several 100,000 sky pollution treatment plants. Just like across the globe, we've got several 100 million probably wastewater treatment plants. We're going to have to build a whole bunch of these sky mining, sky pollution treatment plants. But we can do that. And over time, their cost will get much cheaper, probably fall by about 90%.
what you highlight in this article, one is you lay out a lot of what is happening in the world today. Not certainly the climate, but also the way in which the media frames the debate. But I like that you end on a hopeful note. Yes, it's going to be expensive to initially start up this enterprise of starting out sky mining. So, but over time, once you start building things, certainly the prototype is always going to be the most expensive. But once you find something that works and you're able to duplicate it, the cost comes down. And I feel like that this is one of the things that tends to be missing from a climate change argument, because a lot of it is, and this is probably the media's fault, is based on the fact that this catastrophe is coming. But there's very little about things that we can do on a large scale to address climate change. We talk about building more fuel-efficient cars, which is key. I mean, that is important. The things that don't emit so much pollutants is a key thing. We talk about riding our bikes more or walking and things like that we can do as individuals. But on a large scale, where it really is going to make a serious and important impact, that's not really discussed. And I want to thank you for coming on the program to talk about this.
You bet. Thanks for the opportunity.
Bruce Melton is a writer for Truthout, and you can read his article. It's called Climate Change 2013. Where are we now? Not what you think. It's on Truthout. And that's Truthout Interviews for another week. I'm Ted Asregadoo. We'll see you next time.